The transport ship landed on the crystal platform with barely a whisper. Ben Torres pressed his face against the small window and watched the alien landscape spread out before him. Purple mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touching 3 different colored moons that hung in the lavender sky. This was his first time on planet Xerion, and everything looked like something from a dream. Ben straightened his formal diplomatic uniform and checked his reflection one more time. The dark blue fabric felt stiff and uncomfortable, nothing like the casual clothes he preferred back on Earth. But today was important. Today he would meet the royal family of one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss, and Ben stepped onto the platform. The air smelled like flowers and something sweet he could not name. 2 massive guards waited for him, their silver scales catching the light from the 3 moons above. Each guard stood nearly 8 feet tall, with long arms and faces that looked almost human except for their large, black eyes. "Ambassador Torres," the first guard said in perfect English. His voice was deep and musical. "Welcome to Xerion. The Empress waits for you in the throne room." Ben nodded and tried to look confident. Inside, his stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. He had been a diplomat for only 2 years, and this was his biggest assignment yet. The peace talks between humans and Xerions could change everything for both their worlds. They walked through gardens filled with plants that glowed softly in the dim light. Flowers the size of dinner plates bloomed in colors Ben had never seen before. Some were blue-green like ocean water, others were bright orange with silver spots. Small creatures that looked like flying jewels darted between the flowers, making tiny chiming sounds as they moved. "Your world is beautiful," Ben said to the guards. The second guard smiled, showing teeth that sparkled like diamonds. "We are honored that you think so. Not many humans have walked in our royal gardens." As they approached the palace, Ben's eyes grew wide. The building rose before them like a mountain made of crystal and light. Tall spires twisted up into the sky, each one glowing with a different color. Windows shaped like teardrops reflected the light from the 3 moons, creating rainbows that danced across the walls. "The palace has stood for 5,000 years, the first guard explained as they climbed the wide steps to the main entrance. "Each generation of our royal family has added something new to its beauty." The entrance doors were massive, made from some kind of metal that looked like liquid silver. Strange symbols were carved deep into the surface, telling stories Ben could not read but somehow felt were important. The doors opened silently as they approached, revealing a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Inside, the palace was even more amazing than the outside. The walls were made of living crystal that pulsed gently with soft light. The floor beneath their feet was smooth and warm, like polished stone but somehow alive. Ben could hear music in the distance, not from instruments but from the palace itself, as if the building was singing. "The palace recognizes all who enter," the second guard said, noticing Ben's amazement. "It welcomes those who come in peace and warns us of those who do not." They passed through several halls, each more beautiful than the last. In one room, water flowed up the walls instead of down, forming patterns that looked like writing in a language Ben had never seen. In another, floating lights danced through the air like tiny stars, casting shadows that moved like living things. Finally, they reached the throne room. The guards stopped at the entrance and bowed deeply. "Ambassador Ben Torres of Earth," the first guard announced in a voice that carried through the vast space, seeking audience with Her Imperial Majesty, Empress Vela of Xerion. Ben stepped through the doorway and gasped. The throne room was enormous, with a ceiling so high he could barely see it in the dim light above. Hundreds of beings filled the space, all of them turning to look at him as he entered. Some were Xerions like his guards, but others were from races Ben had only read about in books. There were tall, thin beings with skin like tree bark, small creatures covered in fur that changed colors, and others so strange Ben could not even guess what they might be. But his attention was quickly drawn to the far end of the room, where a throne made of living coral sat on a raised platform. The coral glowed with soft pink and blue light, and small fish-like creatures swam through parts of it as if it were underwater. On the throne sat the most regal being Ben had ever seen. Empress Vela was beautiful in a way that was completely alien but somehow familiar. She was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. 6 arms extended from her body, each one moving with elegant purpose. Her face was almost human in shape, but her eyes were larger and completely black, like looking into deep space. Long hair that seemed to be made of liquid starlight flowed down her back and moved as if it were underwater. Ben began walking toward the throne, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The crowd of beings parted before him, creating a clear path to the Empress. He tried to remember everything he had learned about Xerian culture and customs. He was supposed to stop exactly 20 feet from the throne and bow 3 times before speaking. As he got closer, he could see that the Empress wore robes that seemed to be made of captured moonlight. They shifted and changed color as she moved, sometimes silver, sometimes blue, sometimes a color that had no name. Around her neck hung a necklace made of crystals that looked like tiny stars, each one pulsing with its own light. Ben was halfway to the throne when he noticed movement to the side. A small figure darted out from behind the massive throne, moving so quickly that the guards nearby had no time to react. It was a child, tiny even by human standards, with the same shimmering skin as the Empress but in shades of purple and gold. The little girl stopped suddenly when she saw Ben, as if she had run into an invisible wall. Her eyes, large and golden like tiny suns, grew even wider as she stared at him. Her small mouth fell open in surprise, and she began tugging frantically at the flowing robes of the Empress. "Mama," the child whispered, but the acoustics of the throne room were perfect, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. "Mama, look." Empress Vela looked down at her daughter with a mixture of love and mild annoyance. "Zira, what have I told you about interrupting important ceremonies?" But the little princess ignored her mother's words. She kept staring at Ben as if she had seen a ghost. Her tiny hands gripped the Empress's robes so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Mama," she said again, her voice stronger now but filled with wonder, "that's him." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Ben felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees, and a silence fell over the crowd that was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The gentle music that had been playing in the background faded to nothing. Even the small creatures swimming in the coral throne seemed to stop moving. Ben stood frozen in place, confused by the reaction his presence had caused. He had never been to Xerion before. He had never met their royal family. He had no idea what the little princess was talking about, but the way every being in the room was now staring at him made his skin feel cold and prickly. Empress Vela's 6 arms became completely still, something Ben's briefing materials had told him only happened when a Xerion was experiencing extreme emotion. Her large black eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to take a step backward. But diplomatic training kept him in place, even though his heart was beating so fast he was sure everyone could hear it. "Zira," the Empress said slowly, her voice carrying a warning that even Ben could understand, "what do you mean?" The little princess let go of her mother's robes and took a step toward Ben. Her golden eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling at the same time, as if she could not decide whether to be happy or sad. "It's him, Mama," she said, her voice clear and strong now. "The one from the stories. The one you told me about. Look at his face, look at his eyes. He has the same brave eyes." Ben's confusion deepened. Stories? What stories could she possibly know about him? He had lived a fairly ordinary life before becoming a diplomat. He had never done anything worthy of stories, especially not stories that would reach an alien princess on the other side of the galaxy. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, but the sound was different now. There was excitement in their voices, and something that might have been awe. Some of the beings in the crowd were pointing at Ben, while others bowed their heads as if showing respect. An elderly Xerion stepped forward from the crowd. He was smaller than the guards, with scales that had dulled to a soft gray color with age. His movements were slow but dignified, and when he spoke, everyone listened. Your Imperial Majesty, he said, bowing deeply to the Empress before turning to look at Ben. May I ask the ambassador a question? Empress Vela nodded, though her eyes never left Ben's face. The old Xerian walked closer to Ben, studying his features carefully. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but filled with emotion. Young ambassador, forgive me for asking such a personal question, but do you have family? Brothers or sisters, perhaps? Ben's throat felt suddenly dry. I had a twin brother, he said quietly. But he died several years ago. The old Xerian's scales seemed to brighten slightly, and he nodded as if Ben had confirmed something he already knew. And this brother, the elder continued, did he serve in the military? Perhaps in the Space Forces? The Galactic Defense Corps, Ben replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He was a ship engineer. He died in the Void War. As soon as the words left his mouth, Ben knew that everything was about to change. The old Xerian's eyes filled with tears that sparkled like liquid silver. Around the throne room, beings began to make sounds of recognition and respect. Some bowed, others placed their hands over their hearts, and a few made musical sounds that Ben somehow knew were expressions of honor and gratitude. But it was the little princess who affected him the most. She broke away from her mother's side and ran toward him, her small feet making no sound on the crystal floor. When she reached him, she stopped just close enough to touch his hand with her tiny fingers. You're his brother, she whispered, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the universe. You're the brother of the brave human who saved everyone. Ben knelt down so he could look into her golden eyes at the same level. I don't understand, he said softly. Saved who? The little princess smiled through her tears. All of them, she said simply. All the families on the big ship. All the children who got to go home to their mamas and papas. Your brother made sure they were safe, even when the bad things came to hurt them. Around them, the throne room remained silent, but Ben could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching this moment. He looked up at Empress Vela, who was now standing beside her throne, all 6 of her arms pressed against her heart in what Ben recognized as a gesture of deep respect. Ambassador Torres, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, it seems we have much more to discuss than simple trade agreements. The old Xerian stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. Your brother, he said, his voice thick with emotion, saved my granddaughter. She was only 5 years old when the colony ships fled from the Proxima system. Without his sacrifice, she would never have lived to see her 6th birthday. Ben felt the world spinning around him. He thought of his brother David, always the brave one, always the one who volunteered for the dangerous assignments. David had been the hero of the family, while Ben had always been the careful one, the one who preferred books to adventure. Tell me, Ben said quietly to the little princess, who was still holding his hand. Tell me the story. Princess Zira looked up at her mother, who nodded permission. Then she began to speak, her young voice carrying the weight of legend and truth. Once upon a time, she began, there was a brave human who worked on a big ship that carried families to safety. Princess Zira's golden eyes sparkled as she began her story, her small voice carrying clearly through the silent throne room. Ben remained kneeling beside her, his hand still in her tiny grasp, while hundreds of beings listened to words they had heard many times before but never from the mouth of one so young. The big ship was called the Hope of Tomorrow, Zira said, looking directly into Ben's eyes. It was carrying all the families who had to leave their homes when the bad aliens came to hurt them. There were mamas and papas and children and grandparents, all packed together in one ship because it was the only one that could carry them all to safety. Ben's chest felt tight as he listened. He knew this story, but only the official version. David had died saving a refugee transport during the Void War. That was all the military had told him. They never mentioned that there were children aboard, never spoke of families fleeing their homes. The little princess continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. The ship was very old and not very strong, but it was all they had. Your brother David was the engineer who kept the engines working so the ship could fly through space to the safe planets where no bad aliens could find them. Empress Vela moved closer, her flowing robes shimmering in the crystal light. Zira knows this story because I have told it to her every night since she was old enough to understand words, she said softly. Many of the beings in this room today were children on that ship. Others are the children and grandchildren of those who survived because of your brother's courage. An elegant Zirian woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her scales were a beautiful shade of deep blue, and she wore simple clothes that marked her as a common citizen rather than nobility. In her arms, she carried a small child who looked to be about the same age as Princess Zira. Ambassador Torres, the woman said, bowing deeply. My name is Nira. I was 7 years old on the Hope of Tomorrow. This is my daughter, Kala. She exists because your brother chose to be brave when everything seemed lost. Ben looked at the small child in her mother's arms. Kala had the same golden eyes as Princess Zira, and she was staring at him with curiosity and wonder. It was hard to believe that this beautiful little girl owed her very existence to choices his brother had made years before she was born. Please, Ben said quietly, I need to know what really happened. The military never told me the details. Princess Zira tugged on his hand to get his attention back. The ship was flying for many days, she continued with her story, and everyone thought they were safe. But then the bad aliens found them and started chasing them with big scary ships that had weapons to hurt people. The old Zirian who had first spoken to Ben stepped forward again. The enemy ships were faster than the Hope of Tomorrow, he explained. They were catching up quickly, and everyone on board knew that if they were captured, terrible things would happen to the families. Ben swallowed hard. He remembered hearing about the Void War on the news, but it had seemed so distant from his life on Earth. Now he was learning that his own brother had been in the middle of one of the worst conflicts the galaxy had ever seen. The captain of the ship tried to make it go faster, Princess Zira continued, but the engines were too old and tired. Then something very bad happened. The engines started to break, and the ship began to slow down. The bad aliens were getting closer and closer. Nira, the woman holding her daughter, spoke up again. I remember the fear in the hallways, she said, her voice trembling slightly with the memory. Adults were trying to stay calm for the children, but we could all feel that something terrible was about to happen. Then your brother's voice came over the ship's communication system. What did he say? Ben asked, though part of him was not sure he wanted to know. The elderly Zirian answered. He said that he could fix the engines, but someone would have to go outside the ship to repair the damage. Someone would have to work in the vacuum of space while the ship was still moving. Ben felt his stomach drop. He knew enough about space travel to understand what that meant. Working outside a moving ship in the middle of a battle was essentially a suicide mission. The person would have to seal themselves into a protective suit and hope they could complete the repairs before the enemy caught up or before something went wrong with their equipment. Princess Zira continued her story, but her voice was softer now, as if she understood the sadness of what she was telling. All the other engineers said it was too dangerous. They said whoever went outside might not come back. But your brother said that someone had to try, or all the families would be captured by the bad aliens. David volunteered immediately, the old Zirian said. He did not hesitate for even a moment. When the captain asked if anyone else could do the job, your brother said that he knew the engines better than anyone and that he was not afraid. Ben closed his eyes and tried to picture his brother in that moment. David had always been the brave one, even when they were children. When other kids picked on smaller children at school, David was always the first to step in and help. When their elderly neighbor needed help with yard work, David was always there with a smile and willing hands. The captain gave him the special suit that would protect him in space, Princess Zira said, her small hands gesturing as she spoke. But everyone knew it was very dangerous. The suit only had enough air for a short time, and if the bad alien started shooting at the ship while he was outside, he could be hurt. A tall being with skin like polished wood stepped forward from the crowd. Ben had never seen anyone from his species before. The being had 4 arms and eyes that glowed with soft green light. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through trees. "I was the communications officer on the Hope of Tomorrow," the being said. "I was the one who stayed in contact with your brother while he worked outside the ship. I heard his voice during those final minutes." "Tell me," Ben said, though his voice was barely above a whisper. He was calm, the tree-like being said. Even though he was working in the cold darkness of space, with enemy ships getting closer every second, he never sounded afraid. He kept giving us updates on his progress and asking about the families on board. Princess Zira looked up at Ben with tears in her golden eyes. "He asked the captain to tell all the children not to be scared," she said. "He said that everything was going to be okay and that they would all get to see their new homes soon." Ben felt his own eyes filling with tears. That sounded exactly like something David would say. Even in the most dangerous situation imaginable, his brother had been thinking about other people's fears instead of his own. "The repairs took longer than expected," the communications officer continued. "Your brother had to replace several damaged components while the ship was still moving. Each minute that passed brought the enemy ships closer." Nira shifted her daughter to her other arm and spoke again. "We could hear the enemy weapons firing in the distance," she said. "They were close enough that the ship sensors were detecting their presence. But your brother kept working. He fixed the engines," Princess Zira said, her voice brightening slightly. "He made them work again so the ship could go fast and escape from the bad aliens." Everyone was so happy and thankful. Ben felt a moment of hope, but the sad expressions on the faces around him told him that the story was not over yet. The elderly Zirian placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. "Your brother did repair the engines," he said softly. "The ship was able to increase speed and begin to pull away from the enemy. But when it was time for him to come back inside, we discovered that his suit had been damaged during the repairs." Ben's heart sank. He could guess what had happened next, but he needed to hear it all. "The suit was leaking air," the communications officer explained. "Your brother knew that he did not have enough oxygen to make it back to the airlock safely. He could have tried to rush back inside, but that would have meant leaving the external repairs incomplete. If he had done that, the engines might have failed again once the ship tried to jump to faster-than-light speed." Princess Zira was crying now, but she continued with her story. "He told the captain to take the ship to the safe place," she said through her tears. "He said not to wait for him because all the families were more important than one person. He sealed the hull breach from the outside," the elderly Zirian said. "It was the only way to make sure the ship would survive the jump to hyperspace. Your brother used his own life support system to power the welding tools he needed to complete the job." Ben was crying now too, but he needed to hear the rest. "What happened then?" The communications officer's glowing green eyes grew brighter with emotion. "He sang," he said simply. "As his air ran out and the ship prepared to jump to safety, your brother sang a song from Earth. Something about going home." Ben knew the song. It was an old folk tune that their mother used to sing to them when they were children. David had always loved it because it talked about finding peace after a long journey. The last thing he said, Princess Zira whispered, was that he hoped all the children would have good dreams in their new homes. The throne room was completely silent except for the soft sounds of people crying. Ben looked around and saw that many of the beings who had gathered to hear his story were wiping away tears of their own. Empress Vela stepped forward and knelt beside Ben and her daughter. "The Hope of Tomorrow made it safely to the Kepler colonies," she said gently. "All 347 beings on board survived. They built new lives, had families, and contributed to the peace and prosperity of multiple worlds. My daughter exists because of your brother's sacrifice," Nira said, holding Kala a little tighter. "And her children will exist someday too, and their children after that. Your brother's courage echoes through generations." Ben looked around the throne room with new eyes. How many of these beings were here because David had chosen to sacrifice himself for strangers? How many families existed because his brother had decided that other people's lives were more valuable than his own? Princess Zira wiped her eyes and took Ben's hand again. "That's why Mama tells me the story every night," she said. "So I remember that there are brave people in the universe who help others even when it's scary." The elderly Zirian spoke up again. "Your brother became a legend among our people, Ambassador Torres. His story is told to children across dozens of worlds. He represents the best of what humanity can be." Empress Vela stood up and addressed the entire throne room. "This is why we welcome humans as allies and friends," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Any species that produces individuals capable of such selfless courage deserves our respect and trust." Ben slowly rose to his feet, still holding Princess Zira's small hand. He felt different now, as if something inside him had changed forever. All these years, he had thought of David as his reckless twin brother who had died too young. Now he understood that David had been a hero whose actions had touched hundreds of lives across the galaxy. "I wish I could have known," Ben said quietly. "I wish I could have told him how proud I was." He knew, Princess Zira said with the absolute certainty that only a child can possess. Brave people always know that their families love them. The communications officer approached Ben and bowed deeply. "If I may, Ambassador," he said, "I have something that belonged to your brother. Something he asked me to keep safe in case anyone from his family ever came looking for answers." The tree-like being reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small device. It looked like a standard military communication recorder, the kind that soldiers use to leave messages for their families. "He made this recording during his final minutes outside the ship," the officer said, placing the device gently in Ben's hands. "He said that if anything happened to him, he wanted his family to know that he died doing something that mattered." Ben stared down at the small recorder, his hands shaking slightly. After all these years of wondering about David's final moments, he was holding his brother's last words. Princess Zira squeezed his hand encouragingly. "It's okay," she said softly. "Brave people leave brave words behind." Ben looked up at Empress Vela, who nodded her permission. With trembling fingers, he activated the recording device. David's familiar voice filled the throne room, clear and strong despite the static from the old equipment. "Hey Ben," David's voice said, and Ben felt his knees nearly give out from hearing his brother speak again. "If you're hearing this, then something went wrong with my little spacewalk today. But don't be sad, little brother. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do." The recording continued, and Ben closed his eyes to focus on his brother's words. "I know you always thought I was crazy for volunteering for the dangerous jobs, but I need you to understand something. When you have the chance to save innocent people, you take it. When you can stand between the darkness and the light, you do it. Someone has to keep watch so others can go home safely." Ben opened his eyes and saw that everyone in the throne room was listening with deep respect, as if they were hearing sacred words. "I want you to live a good life, Ben," David's voice continued. "Find someone to love, have adventures, see amazing things. But remember that our family name means something now. It means courage when courage is needed. It means standing up for people who cannot stand up for themselves." The recording began to fade, but David's final words came through clearly. "Take care of yourself, little brother. And if you ever meet any of the families from this ship, tell them that it was an honor to help them get home safely." When the recording ended, the throne room remained silent for a long moment. Then Princess Zira let go of Ben's hand and walked over to her mother. She whispered something in the Empress's ear, and Vela smiled through her tears. "Princess Zira has made a request," the Empress announced to the gathered crowd. "She would like Ambassador Torres to know that he will always have a home among our people. She says that the brother of such a hero should never have to face the universe alone." Ben looked around the throne room at all the faces watching him with kindness and respect. These beings from dozens of different worlds had come together to honor his brother's memory and to welcome Ben into their community. "Thank you," he said, his voice strong despite his tears. David would be proud to know that his sacrifice brought so many people together. And I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to make sure that the peace between our peoples lasts for generations to come. Princess Zira ran back to Ben and hugged his legs tightly. Will you come visit us again? She asked, looking up at him with hopeful golden eyes. Ben knelt down and hugged her back. As often as I can, he promised. And when you're older, maybe you can visit Earth and see where your hero grew up. The little princess beamed with excitement at that possibility. Around them, the throne room filled with the sounds of celebration and joy. But Ben heard something else too. He heard his brother's voice in his memory, proud and happy that his sacrifice had created so much good in the universe. As the formal ceremony began to conclude and beings started to mingle and talk, Ben realized that he was no longer just a diplomat trying to negotiate a trade agreement. He was now a bridge between worlds, carrying his brother's legacy forward into a future filled with hope and friendship. The palace sang its crystal song around them, and Ben finally understood that some stories never truly end. They just grow larger and touch more lives as time passes, creating ripples of goodness that spread across the stars.